Hello, welcome to the CarCast+Edmunds podcast. I'm Matt, the Motorator DeAndre, here with Alistair Weaver. Oh man, we're just coming back from Monterey Car Week. Tons of debuts there. We want to get into a few that I think kind of stood out and caught our attention that were kind of interesting. Before we get started, let me tell you guys about our friends at Bet Online. Bet Online is the world's most trusted platform and your number one source for everything football, from the preseason NFL to college kickoff. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. Think you know your stuff? Get in on our winner take all $300,000 NFL survivor pool for the upcoming season. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with over 150 different slot games. Head to the website today and use the promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, to get in on the action. Bet Online, the game starts here. I don't know when did you get up to Monterey? We went up Tuesday night, basically. I went up with Adam Carolla and a few friends of ours to get back on the track. Adam did a little bit of vintage racing, and you guys are going to here in a couple of upcoming episodes of CarCast, Adam joined me on a few interviews that we got a chance to grab a few friends of ours, and it was nice to have Adam back on the show. I should probably also invite him back in at some point to just go, hey, what's happened with the racing? Although I'm sure he's going to get into a lot of that on the Adam Carolla show. But it was good to just kind of hang out and hit the track and stuff. And he was in the car Wednesday mornings. He brought the BRE Datsun Roadster that so many of you guys are familiar with, but we forget that I don't think he's driven that car maybe 12 or 13 years. And he kind of just hopped into it again. And anyway, long story short on the Roadster, a few electrical issues on the practice days, then ran great Friday, did the whole race session. Gained back some spots that he lost in the practice session, ran a good lap time, and then somewhere in the process, without us even really knowing, blew a head gasket. So when we showed up Saturday morning, the guys were kind of thrashing on the car to see if they can get it to work, but it's just going to be too much. So we're down a head gasket, which means Saturday we got to focus on just hanging out at the track and grabbing a couple of interviews with some friends. Sat down with Dario Franchitti and sat down with Jim Farley from Ford. So those interviews will be in a couple of future episodes. I got to listen to them and make sure they turned out well and put them together. I was trying to listen to the audio files going, God, I can't hear something. I go, oh, I realize it recorded in multiple tracks. So I think we're good. But when did you get up there, Alistair?
So I got up there Wednesday. A bit of drama early on when I got a puncture before I'd even left home. So I spent the first 2 hours in a tire shop, still in South Bay of LA. But made it up there Wednesday evening.
You drove the Porsche. You drove the 993.
Yeah, I drove my classic Porsche up there. There's something cool about. I mean, it's about a 5.5, 6 hour drive from LA, but there is something really cool about driving up to Car Week in a classic car. And I found an amazing road. I can't remember if it's a 168 or the 198. Somebody, I'm going to have to look it up. It's one of the two that basically, when you follow Google Maps sometimes and it tries to get you off the highway and get you there quicker. Well, it did. And I had like 40 miles where there was just me. There's people coming the other direction, were like over the mountains. I had no cell phone signal, so I couldn't join the meeting I was supposed to be in. And it was just heaven. I took a picture, put it on my Instagram, and there was just like me in the middle of nowhere. It was glorious. So yeah, and it's just, I mean, if you've never been up there, and I guess a lot of people listening are probably, it's a very spoilt thing to go to, shall we say, and it's hard to get tickets for a lot of the events if you're not part of the media as we are, and or a billionaire. It's just crazy. It's like stepping into this kind of Disneyland of cars. And I was staying at the hotel called the Inn at Spanish Bay, which is kind of very much a focal center of the event. And they have got like a little sort of roundabout, if you like, outside the hotel, and they just park like some of the choice stuff around there.
Yeah.
And it's ridiculous. Like somebody's going, do you know what that is? That's an Apollo. I think they built like 3 of those. And there was 4 Bugattis at one point. There was a Hispano Suiza, one of the new ones. There was like a Rimac. It was just nuts. And every time you came in, it was like being in this kind of crazy car. And then there's a billion kids walking around with cameras and like wannabe influencers and everything else. And there is a bit of a who's who. You know, a lot of people turn up even if they're not exhibiting cars, and it's it's an amazing event. It's a bit surreal, and it's definitely not short of pretension. You know, if you don't like capitalism and don't like affluence, it's not the show for you.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of attitude that sometimes it comes with that, and also the dress. I mean, we can talk about like the quail event we went to, but you know, there is magnificent people watching. I
You
mean,
know,
we talked.
I've said this before, but I still feel like going to the track is the one stop you want to do. As Monterey Car Week like you said, starts to become even more affluent, more expensive, hotel rooms and stuff like that. If you're able to drive into town for a day and then leave and not have to spend a fortune, a Saturday at the track is like $100 or something, like $109, whatever the ticket is for it. And that's probably one of the most reasonable things you can do there. But walking around the track on a Saturday, not only will you see the most amazing cars on the track and hear them, but during the lunch hour and stuff, they bring out a handful of the supercars. They brought out that McMurtry fan car that did the Goodwood Hill Climb record.
Yeah,
They had two of those there. Dario Franchitti went out in a T50. He drove the T50 Nicky Lauda, the
that's the
T50S.
Gordon
Yeah, the
Murray.
Gordon Murray
Yeah,
car. And then two of his other guys drove a T50 and a T33. And then the vintage race cars that are over there. And then every ticket is essentially a pit pass. So a paddock pass. You get to walk around and get up on all of the cars that are there. And as you walk around and see all of the racing cars, there are a handful of those guys that get what's like a show pass for their street car. So Bruce Canepa brings a fleet of racing cars for his clients that they maintain and prep for him, but he rolls up in one of his Canepa modified 959 Porsches, right?
the other one I love. I was running through the paddock, and there was like a handful of old vintage racers. Then there was literally like a trash can. Then there was like one of those little golf buggy things. And in the middle of this like dump there was a 250 short wheelbase Ferrari. And I was like, that's an $8 million car. It was just
Oh,
like sitting there by
and
the trash truck.
you're
Yeah.
scratching the surface. So a friend of ours, Chip Connor, he was there with some of his cars, and then he brought his Ferrari 250 GTO, his Le Mans winning GTO. It is the overall Le Mans winning GTO, and we were talking to him about it, and he's like, "Oh, I just replaced the engine. I have an engine built in Holland, and I bring it here." And Adam's like, "Well." What about the original engine? He goes, no, no, no. He goes, I drive the car. So the original engine, the numbers matching engine that can never be replaced. He goes, we take that out and we put it on display in his car collection. They get another engine in it so he can drive it a bit. Because if you damage the car, right, a fabricator can fix it. But if you punch
Yeah.
a hole in the block, you can't. So he's like, the original engine is where a lot of the value is. And at this point, when we were sitting and talking to Dario Franchitti, I think Adam goes, oh, we were talking to Chip Connor. We saw his car there. He goes, I don't know. That's 70 million. Dario's like, no way. Way up, way up. It's $100 million car. And Chip's like, no, I drove it here. And he goes, I'm gonna leave the track at like 3 and I'm gonna drive it home because he has a house in the area. It's $100 million Ferrari. It's an overall Le Mans winner.
But that's I love that. At least you've got a proper enthusiast driving it. We weren't going to talk about the tuning. We said to
Yeah.
ourselves we'll talk about the tuning stuff next week, but
Yeah.
we were just it's just an amazing, like, even if you're not into cars, like my wife's been with me a couple of times. She didn't come this year. Even if you're not into cars, just as like a cultural thing. But you're right about the racetrack. The racetrack is the place where it wasn't actually that busy. That is the place where you go and you'll see people who are, it's a little bit different. Like if you go to Goodwood in the UK, a lot of the time they hire pro drivers. So you'll get Formula One drivers driving these classic old cars.
Yeah.
Actually, in America, they tend to drive themselves. So you've got these wonderful kind of like old characters. They're probably like CEO of some epic corporation.
Yeah.
And it was, yeah, I mean, you've got like McLaren CEO there driving an old Williams Formula One car. You've got, Jim Farley, CEO of Ford. He was racing at Cobra. He actually won in his AC Cobra. And we got some
Yeah.
stuff Farley next week. There's just a great collection of car people. I saw one of Infinity's design guys, who's actually a Brit, lives in San Diego. He's got a classic Mini. He was racing that, and I caught him up over in the paddock, and he was like, he had a little scooter with all the tires, and he was spanning it himself. So there's just a great atmosphere. So Friday we do quail, which is where we're about to talk about some of all like the road car unveils. Then there's the racing on Saturday, and then
Yeah.
Sunday is the Concours d'Elegance, and that's the way it's been set up for a while. But we should, Matt, we should get into some of the car unveils because otherwise we can just wax lyrical and sound like a bunch of spoiled.
Yeah. Well, look, and we mentioned Farley, so let's talk about Lincoln because this is a big. Now, when I talked to Farley, he gave some history on why Lincoln is there at at the Quail and at Monterey Car Week. So we'll save that for another time. But let's get into the vehicle itself. Did you get a chance to go over and check out the Navigator, or did you
Yeah,
go
so
to
I
a separate event for the Navigator?
Yeah, I actually went to a little press preview. So they did we got a bit of time with the engineers and the designers and a lot of people behind it, and then they did like a public facing event with Serena Williams turned up. I mean, this is funny, isn't it? Like Serena Williams turns up, but it was really weird because you're like, okay, she retired. You like stick around, have a glass of champagne, talk to people. No, Serena Williams turned up, did a thing, like gone. I was like,
When you basically are getting paid to do an event, to do a pop in or something, like it's usually pretty quick,
yeah, it's like
which is funny because
no questions.
when I do it like with Adam, he's like, yeah, let's sit around, let's have a cocktail, let's talk cars for a bit,
Yeah,
because he likes to talk cars for a bit. But so
yeah.
tell us about the Navigator.
So the Navigator, as we know, so Lincoln's calling it all new. It's stretching it a little bit. I mean, basically, what this is and I think we're seeing a lot of this with gas cars at the moment. We saw it with the latest Cayenne, for example. It's a really, really heavy rework of what they had before. So the windscreen's the same, but I think it's very fair to say that it is new. The interior's all new. The styling, the front end is new, the rear end is new. I mean, this thing, you figured out how big the Navigator. The Navigator's based on the F-150. It's massive, and that it's a massive 3-row. And this has always been its calling card. It's a full size SUV, 3 rows, either 7 or 8 seats. So you've got 2 seats in the front, 2 seats in the middle, and then you can either you can have a bench in the middle, and then you've got a bench in the rear. Interior's been redone. It's got a 48-inch, I think I'm right, 48-inch screen that basically goes all the way along the top of the fascia. It's not that deep. Because my first impression was how distracting this is going to be, but it's not that deep, and it basically gives you a screen all the way along the top of the fascia. They've got another touch screen below for all the controls, and what that means is the whole thing's very kind of much more simple inside and actually quite elegant. Tons of storage space. They've even had to redesign the steering wheel, so it's a little bit like a flat top, so you can see all the instruments.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, listen, we're not driving it yet. It goes on sale next spring. It's just like a great road trip car. It's massive, it's comfortable, it's going to have, it's got tons of space, tons of storage space, lots of tech. They've thrown their hat in with Google, so you're using a lot of Google technology. And they're also going big on this idea that it's like a home away from home. I mean, honestly, it's as big as many Manhattan apartments, but it wants to be like a kind of calming environment. So they've teamed up with that. Is it Calm? Yeah, they've teamed up with Calm. I can't remember if it's Calm or Headspace. It's Calm. So you get like a subscription to their app, but also they've got this gadget where if you turn the car off, you can then BMW does a similar thing. You can activate a thing and it'll tip the seat back, it'll start a massage, it'll warm you a little bit, it'll play like soothing music. It's got like waterfalls going on the displays. And I think they're just trying to say we're going to create like just a great road trip vehicle, a massive family vehicle.
It is. And actually when I spoke to Jim Farley, he was saying that I think the sales for this in China are now the largest. I believe China, it was other parts of Asia. And he was explaining to me that the customers that are getting this car, a huge portion of these customers use it as a lounge without even driving the vehicle, or when they get home or are driven home. He goes, they'll sit in the car and put it in like the spa mode and just relax and put the like massaging seats on and lean it back and maybe even take a nap for 20 minutes. He's like, that's literally the process like that. They go through before, after work all day, you get this 20-minute break, 30-minute break before you go into the house or go into with, sometimes multiple families and lots of family running around. It's very hectic. He goes, this has become the norm. And I was like, so they don't even drive it? He's like, because I said, hey, you you've taken the spa experience and put it into a Lincoln. And he goes, and that's what they use it for. They don't even use it to drive around that much. It's like they take a 30-minute break each day. I was
That's
like,
kind of
that's a
nice.
great
Yeah, because
idea.
the massage seats actually are now in the second row as well, not the third row. They recline, but just the second row, and you can have like a big center console and stuff and kick back. And it's they're gonna do. I was talking about, you got hybrid, you got, because obviously there's going to be a electric version of Cadillac Escalade. This is still a gas engine, familiar 3.5 liter V6. No hybrid yet. It might come. What they're doing is dropping the base trim because people want it quite highly spec. So it's going to start at basically going to start at 100 grand. They were
Yeah.
saying just below, but then if you include destination, it's going to be basically call it 100 grand. So it's going to be somewhere between, say, 100 and probably about 140. If you go to like the black label trim and spec it up, it's going to be like 140 grand, something like that, which is a hell of a lot of money to spend on something that's, ultimately based on a truck. But there's an awful lot of tech and an awful lot of car there. And, obviously there is a market. Think about rivals. You've obviously got the Cadillac Escalade.
Yeah.
Infiniti QX80, which is new, starts a little bit cheaper, but then certainly gets up there, and they would see themselves as a rival. Jeep Grand Wagoneer, which is relatively new, that would also fit into this class. So it's,
Yeah,
it's
I would say they were going after Range Rover, but Range Rover has kind of crept up as well. They've priced themselves, especially their special edition and high trim models, like an autobiography. If they still have that, that's $200,000.
Yeah, we talked about that because also there's the Mercedes GLS, there's the BMW X7, but they're quite different cars. They're sort of monocoque chassis. They're not based on and they're not as big. I mean, the Range Rover's grown a bit, and you can now get it with 3 rows, but none of they're massive vehicles, but they're not nearly as big as a Navigator.
Yeah.
And so we were talking about that, and we can look at Edmunds' own data as well. And people don't tend to cross shop the Europeans a little bit, but this is kind of as you say, an American phenomenon, and increasingly a China phenomenon as well. So yeah, they do line up a bit with like Rangers in terms of price and GLS X7, but that's not really, you either like want a big domestic or you don't, or Infinity, I suppose. The other thing about it, which we forgot to mention, is they've got this fancy new tailgate. So it a bit again like the Range Rover, it splits into two. The bottom half or the bottom third folds down like a traditional truck tailgate, and then the top half cantilevers up, and you can take 500 pounds. So it's basically like a nice little tailgating party thing. They're going to do some extras where you can like turn it into seats and that sort of thing. So I was thinking, if I was taking the family on a road trip, one of these would be great. It's a big vehicle if you live in an urban area. I think it's big for LA. But if you're anywhere else, it's and you got the money, it's just a nice way to travel. They're
Yeah.
just, it'll.
Now,
And
I know there's been some quality issues across the brand for a little while, and that's something that they are addressing. And that's going to be a big thing. I think that's going to be kind of the make or break thing if they're able to increase that and make this just an overall better vehicle. Eh, there's been some issues in the past from little things that shouldn't even be uh, an issue with the Lincoln brand window switches falling off the door and things like that we've seen, that we've experienced. This is an opportunity for them to bring that quality back up. So hopefully they nail it. If they nail it, it's going to be successful.
And also, I think the fact that it isn't genuinely all new, they almost do new term, don't they? That there's a lot of proven technology here. So you would hope, and it's interesting as well from a software perspective, because you sort of forget these days that a lot of the time it's the software that falls over. And I had a really interesting chat on Saturday night. The guy called Doug Field, who basically is leading Ford's EV development, software development. He's ex-Tesla and he's a Silicon Valley guy. Really interesting guy. They've thrown their hat in with Google basically, which I think just makes a lot of sense. So what they're basically doing is using a Google architecture, and then they can load on their own stuff onto that. So it's almost think of it like developing Lincoln apps for Google rather than developing a Lincoln infotainment system and bolting Google on. You can still do Apple CarPlay and things like that, which is basically an app in itself. So it's I think that's very smart. We've talked for a long time about the fact that, why does Detroit think it can do software better than Silicon Valley? And the reality is it almost certainly can't. So that might help it as well on the software front. And then the hardware, a lot of the hardware is familiar from both Ford and Lincoln. So I think it's going to be a good thing. We'll see. Drive it fairly soon, on sale next spring. Let's see how it rolls. And
Yeah.
Lincoln's had their whole range is now basically updated.
All
Yeah, interesting
right.
time.
Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. Okay, so the other thing that excuse me, the other thing that we saw, and this is kind of on the higher end of things, Lamborghini debuted a new vehicle at the Quail. I went over and kind of got a glimpse of it, but I didn't get all the details. It was pretty busy over there. Um, I don't know. Did you get a chance to get in on this car?
Yeah, and I did spend some time with Lamborghini's sales and marketing CMO or whatever it's titled. We're actually going to play the interview next week. We haven't had time to cut it together yet. Yeah, we spent a fair bit of time with it, both me and other members of the team. This is called the Temerario, and there was a lot of fuss initially. Was it named after a bull like every other Lamborghini? The reality is it is. It's like a bull from 1879 or something like that. The one thing that about it, we got the pictures, as we tend to get the pictures early under what we call an embargo, and then we saw it in real life as well. It was launched in a very kind of demure matte blue color.
Yeah.
Although there are a few green pictures knocking around. I mean, it's a nice piece of design, but it's a little bit generic. And you know what it's like growing up with Lamborghinis? You know, they were always shocking. You go back to the original Miura, which is still, arguably the most beautiful car ever designed. Then you had the Countach in the 1970s. And even going through things like the Diablo, they were like pure theater. And I think, what differentiated Lamborghini from Ferrari and everybody else is that they were just that much more extreme. And this is, I mean, like, it's a nice design, but it's not shocking in any way. And
I got a couple thoughts on it though. It's like they've had their moneymaker sports cars, right? We had the Gallardo and then
yeah, Hurricane.
Hurricane, and those have done well for them. It was a way to get a lot of new customers and stuff into the brand. So one, they can't depart too much from that. It's like redesigning the Prius. If you made the Prius wildly different, then people were like, oh, it's not a Prius anymore. So you got to be a little sensitive to that. But also, this is just the jumping off point for every other edition or special edition version of this car they're going to do. Maybe an Evo, maybe a lightweight, and there's a two-wheel drive, an all-wheel drive. It's like all the things like imagine this is sort of the base 911. And now they're going, what are we going to do with the 911 for the next, 10 years? And how are we going to do all the variations of it? So I think it looks good, and I think it's a great jumping off point for them to do all these other things. But as it stands, it's cool. I mean, it's not a V10
I
though.
agree. I agree. I agree with everything you're saying that they. It's also easy to kind of snip, but like, because, there was a time when Lamborghini was great at making poster cars and not very good at making money. Now
Yeah.
largely because of the Urus, they're making a lot more cars, and obviously they're part of the Volkswagen empire now, which helps them enormously. And it is a nice piece of design. And you're right, this is the successor to the Gallardo, which looks great these days, by the way. There's a few knocking around Monterey, the Hurricane, and now this. So this is their entry level car, even if it's going to be 300 grand. It's their entry level car, and they are now a more sensible company. Talking to this marketing guy, I've spoken to Stefan Winkelmann, who's their CEO before. They do things like customer clinics these days. They know what people want, and this is a lot more usable. So it's got a bigger trunk in the front. It can now apparently accommodate people up to 6'7", because on the Hurricane you're okay for in the coupe. I'm 6'4", I was okay in the coupe. Couldn't, struggle to drive the Roadster. My knees were kind of around my ears. So they've now made it accessible to people up to 6'7". There's a bit more luggage space behind your shoulders. So they're trying to recognize actually people are going to use this car. People want to go away for the weekend in this car. So, we need to accommodate that. So it is, I said when I looked at it, is it a bit more of a GT? Because it looks a little bit more like that.
Yeah.
For me, there's a bit of McLaren in it. There's a bit of Audi R8. it feels, yeah, less crazy than a lot of Lambos, and surely deliberately so, but it's also like bonkers fast. And
Yeah, so the power plant's changing though. They're going from the 10 to an 8. Not that the 8 is
yeah,
anything to shy away from.
yeah, they've got rid of. I mean, the Hurricane, the V10 in the Hurricane, and I drove the last version like a few months ago. That was like one of the great engines. And if
Yeah.
you think about it, that all versions of it were in the Gallardo, they were in the Audi R8, they were in the Hurricane, and I'd buy a Hurricane in the heartbeat just for that engine, naturally aspirated V10. So now legislation, emissions, blah blah blah, need for power, all of that has gone away. So we've now got a 4 liter V8 twin turbo,
Flat
which
plane
will
crank.
flat plane crank,
Yeah.
rev to 10,000 RPM.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's insane. That's a turbo engine, V8, pretty significant capacity, revving to 10,000. And they've got 3 electric motors. One of them sort of bolted onto the engine gearbox, one of them, and then two of them that are basically also providing some torque vectoring and stuff at the front, which will help it better to deploy the power. So I'm trying to find my notes here. What's the overall power, Matt? I can't find my notes now.
I want to say 789.
No, I think it's more than that, isn't it? Is
I
that
think
right?
I think the V8 is 789, and then with
Oh, and then the
it's
thing on top.
907. I think I remember 907 total combined horsepower. That might
That
be
sounds right. 907 horsepower, and because of all the electric thing, like a stupid amount of torque as well. Yeah, so that's where the 3E motors add 221 pounds-feet of torque, 8-speed gearbox. Yeah, 907 horsepower. So 789 from the V8, bolt on the electric motors, 907. And obviously the instantaneous torque that comes from electric motors, which is it's a crazy amount of power, isn't it? And for what is the entry level car? I mean, you
yeah.
talked about lightweights and STOs and all that stuff, which will surely come, and we'll probably have like beyond 1,000. It's nuts.
It's nuts.
It's nuts. The whole thing's going mad. I mean, I drove up there in my 911's got 280, and only weighs like 2,200 pounds or something, but it's got 285 horsepower. And honestly, that was fine. That's
Yeah,
fine.
well, to be fair, a Gordon Murray T50 that seats 3 people only weighs about 2,200 pounds.
Yeah, there's that as well. The
Yeah.
Lambo's not, talking about weight, the Lambo, like the McLaren, is not carbon fiber tub. It's actually aluminum. But again, there's debate about is that a problem? And it's stiffer than the Hurricane was. I mean, I'm sure it's going to be great. And you're right. If you really want to make it more outlandish, you can probably have it. You can have it in green, and you can probably do different things to it. But yeah, a more kind of sensible, usable Lamborghini, and yeah, but also like
Honestly,
bonkers power.
the refinement they've done to it and just being an evolution of a platform that was a successful line of cars for them. I think it's going to be an amazing car to drive. I think it's
I
going to
think
be
it's going
really,
to be
I
amazing
think
to
it's going to
drive.
be great.
And I like the fact that it's more usable. I mean, I remember taking a Gallardo Roadster from the UK to the Faroe Islands. If you don't know where that is, that's between Scotland and Iceland. So that's like sitting in the North Atlantic. And there was me and a cameraman, and like the trunk was basically like, there's enough for one small bag. So we had to kind of like wash our underpants every night, and like hug the camera for 1,000 miles. But so I like the fact that they're usable. I think it's ridiculous having supercars that you can only drive for an hour in the morning because you
Yeah.
can't, they're uncomfortable and you can't fit anything in them. So yeah, I think a more usable Lamborghini, it's a cool thing.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about more usable. The other car that was there that caught attention, BMW M5 Touring. We teased this a little bit in the previous weeks, seeing this sort of, I don't want to say resurgence, but we kind of like what's going on with wagons. I think the car companies are looking at the success, if you will, of what Audi's done with their RS6 and the variants of that. Um, and I think they're going, hey, this could be interesting. We knew the M5 Touring, the wagon was going to be coming out, but now we got to see it in person. And I think you even said previously that we should expect an AMG wagon at some point.
Yeah, I think they're going to do an E63 wagon. The cynic in me says this is a bit of a publicity stunt to get more noise around the M5 because you bring out an M5, it's like, it's new M5, great, but you bring out
Everybody
the
just talked
wagon,
about the weight. Everyone's like, new
yeah,
M5 is too heavy. That's it. And like completely eclipsed over every other detail of the car. Like it's too heavy.
and
But
then so it's like now we got a wagon we can kind of like it's like don't look at that, don't look at that, look at this, it's got a big trunk. You're right. I mean, like RS6 appeals to a niche. BMW's obviously decided either for marketing PR reasons or for because they reckon they're going to sell a ton. I was there at the track. I had a good to sort of poke around it. It looks fantastic. It's just got these really kind of the rear haunches. It sits really wide at the rear. It's got this kind of diffuser treatment with the exhaust pipes at because these things can look a bit heavy at the rear, doesn't it? It looks, it's the first time in a while we said BMW. It looks fantastic. I think it's going to have amazing presence on the road. And I think and for me as well, it somehow looks more harmonious as a wagon than it does as a sedan.
yeah,
Everything else about and it's a proper wagon. It's like there's tons of room inside. It's not like, oh, it's got like a shooting brake rear end, but you can only fit a briefcase. No, it's like a big family car. I mean, for me right now, this would be about like my ideal car. And it's a ton of it's a ton of
like
weight and a ton of power. We talked about it. It's the
I
same as
want
the
to get
M5.
into some of the specs of it, and you can give us some of the performance and the specs on it. But yeah, didn't go crazy on the design, like some of the BMWs we see on the road now. There's a few things that are kind of hit or miss. Like we were walking through I don't know, Adam and I were like walking through a parking lot, and there was like the XM
Yeah.
hybrid, the V8 hybrid, and it was like black and gold with like gold pinstripes all around like the accents of the rear. And Adam's like, look at what this guy did to the car. I go, no,
Yeah.
that's off the showroom floor. He's like, are you crazy? Are you serious? I go, yeah. And he goes, I guess I kind of appreciate what they're trying to do. And I was like, yeah, they went with the funky design and they're trying to accentuate it, they're going all in on it. So he's like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So
Yeah, I dislike that car intensely. I don't dislike it because it's all about the pose. Yeah, I did a video on that car. It's like it's got like a rear bench and then like crazy bucket seats. It's all over the place. But the M5, some of this is because they've got new design direction. So we are seeing a kind of new era of BMW design, which will be a bit different. Um, some of it also is just because the XM is an eccentric car at a really high price point, bought by not many people, so they can afford to be a bit more outrageous. The 5 Series, especially in Europe, is like still the default executive car. So they just know that their customer base is conservative with a little c, well, sometimes conservative with a big C as well, but they are. So it's kind of a different direction. They just can't screw it up. A bit like the 3 Series, it's like you've got to appeal to such a broad range of people that you can't go outrageous. And the M5, they can kind of turn the volume up a little bit, but it's got presence. I mean, it's big. It has, it's got so much muscularity to it that you're never gonna kind of mistake it for something else. And yeah, like the specs starts at 120, 23 grand, which is kind of on par with the Audi.
yeah,
You've got a plug-in hybrid, which the powertrain's shared a lot with the XM, which I detest so much. 717 horsepower, 738 pounds-feet of torque, but it does weigh 5,500 pounds, so you're going to need all that power. I wish it was lighter and maybe a bit, it'd be better to have more lightweight. We've driven the prototype of the M5. So, I'm sure it's going to be a great thing on sale later this year.
that when I had up on the screen now, those are the press photos, and they have it in kind of this like satin black and kind of give it this Batmobile kind of look to it. But honestly, you can't really see a lot of the details of the bodywork on this thing and the rear diffuser that you were talking about. But when we saw it up in Monterey, I maybe it was like sort of the orange kind of gold, and I thought I had pictures. I can't really find the pictures.
You're right. The car was in sort of green with a red interior and a lot more striking. They do this with press pics sometimes. I don't know why they like launch them in dark grey because the whole point of a press car is to make some impact. But anyway,
Yeah, and like I said, I'm trying to find like something that kind of makes sense. Like here's
oh,
a
there you
press
go,
photo
there
of a
you go.
green, but you can kind of see in this angle, it looks like it's got a really, fat behind, but um,
It has got a fat behind, but it's a
uh,
fat curvaceous behind.
yeah,
It works. It works. It looks really good. And I think, RS6, then there's going to be the E-Class wagon, which will also be plug-in hybrid. I mean, the interesting about the Audi, of course, is the Audi's naturally aspirated. So there's going to be the Audi's not naturally aspirated. The Audi's turbo, but it doesn't have, it's not hybrid, which the BMW will be. So
yeah,
we shall
yeah.
see. Cool
I
thing.
think this is cool. I can't wait to get our hands on it and kind of put it through the paces. Of course, we're gonna have to find some way to do a U-Drags video of RS6 and M5 Touring, right?
Can we borrow the dogs to put them in the boot, in
Yeah,
the trunk?
yeah. We're gonna get them little helmets, and little goggles, and little harnesses, so they can do the U-Drag video. Yeah. Listen, I think it'd be great. There was a lot more certainly at Monterey Car Week that we want to get into. I think we need to dedicate another show to just all these, what are we calling them? These they're not resto mod brands, but like Singer, sort of the reimagining or remastering. There are all these funny terms that they're using, but there were so many up there.
It was staggering, wasn't it? And just the money that obviously people are willing to spend on this stuff. And a lot of them were Porsche based, and I think
Yeah.
that's an amazing tribute to the both the power of the Porsche brand and the fact that you can buy all the parts and everything else. But there was also like resto mod, say whatever you want to call them, reimagined Ferraris and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
But before you
so
get too
yeah,
excited, everything's going to cost $1 million now. So just so you know,
yeah.
everything
Plus,
is going to be $1 million.
till you start, till you then personalize it. It's I mean, yeah, we should talk about. I mean, we're going to show some interviews with CEO Ford next week with the Lamborghini team and others, but we should also get into some of that market because it is fascinating. It's also fascinating how the manufacturers themselves are kind of saying, hang on a minute, there's a lot of money. Like Porsche had a 993 Speedster, which we could talk about next week, and that's from their Sonderwunsch. And basically, they sat there and said, hang on a minute, everybody's eating our lunch. We can do this, and we're Porsche, so why aren't we doing it? So they've now got like their own bespoke division.
Yeah.
And then
Smart.
they're sat on a stand, and they're next to Gunter Works, who basically reimagined the 993, and then you've got Singer Porsche and Tuttle, which is a British brand, had this beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful
Oh,
GT.
don't confuse the trademarks though. Singer reimagines Porsches. Gunther Works remasters Porsches. That's their on the
Is
back
that
of their
right?
car. It's the remastered version. You can't use the same terminology.
I remember when Singer came out, and they were so worried about the legals. Basically, when you got like a press release that said, and I think you had to sign a disclaimer. This is in the early days that literally said, "Thou shalt not describe it as like a 911. Thou shalt describe it as like reimagined sports car or something." Because there was this big,
Yeah.
still the relationship between these like brands and the mothership is always like it's the same with Brabus and Mercedes. There's always this kind of like love hate. They kind of love the fact that it brings attention to Porsche. They love the fact that they buy a load of parts, but then there's also a bit of like it's kind of like our baby you're messing with. So
Yeah.
there's
Oh,
there's
listen,
this sort of push and pull.
every single social media post from Singer has like a 4 paragraph explanation in fine print. Like when they post to Instagram, they're like, new Singer debuted at Monterey, and then 3 paragraphs of disclaimer how it's not associated with
Yeah,
Porsche in there. But
don't.
still cool to see. However, they're getting it
But
done,
they're
navigating
also
the
getting
legal
big.
works.
I was talking to one of them Singer's marketing guys who's been there forever, and I was actually at university at college with him 25 years ago, and it's just funny how like our careers and lives just ended up in the same place. And he was telling me like there's Singer in the US still, which is now in Torrance in the southern part of LA, but then they've also got they're also building cars in the UK. They've got like 600-700 people now. I mean, you think of it as
Yeah.
being a pretty small boutique company. They're doing like 100 cars a year. They've got about 600-700 people working there. These are not insignificant concerns. I mean, right, you still can't afford to get sued, but they're not. It's not like a guy in a garden shed as it used to be.
Yeah. Actually, you're more concerned about getting sued. People sue people with money. You,
That's true.
you know,
That's true.
you gotta. a concept car and the guy mortgaged his house to get it built, like no one's suing that guy. Like that, it's done, right?
Yeah,
You could prevent him from moving forward, but that's it. So,
that's a cease and desist.
yeah, it's like, it's the least amount of money. There's nothing there. All right, let's go ahead and wrap this one up. I know we've got probably a couple of weeks more of fun things to talk
We're
about
gonna milk this.
Yeah, I think we will. And we got some good interviews, I think, as well. So that'll be exciting. All right, anything else since we're wrapping?
No, if you want to see highlights, I've got a few on like Instagram, Weaver on Cars. I know you have as well on Motorator.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of there if you want to like dig into it. And if you go to edmunds.com/news, we actually did a special page rounding up everything from Monterey Car Week. We talked about it before with the death of the auto show. This is the new auto show, and it's not just crazy exotica. There's also, Lincoln Navigators and
Yeah.
all that sort of thing. So we could talk more
Yeah.
about that next week.
Right on. All right, guys. Thanks so much. Until next time, keep the air in the spare and the bag in the wheel.